The concept is when people come to comedy show, they normally expect the comedian to be the default position to be a straight white male comedian. So if you are not straight, if you're not white, if you're not male, you kind of have to explain yourself so that they know what's the starting point and how they should look at you.
Welcome to Super Authentic Tales. Today we've got Kuan-wen, a Taiwanese stand-up comedian who kicked off his career in the UK, navigating the new culture while embracing his identity as an immigrant and a gay individual. Get ready for some laughs and insight into his comedy journey. Oh, and don't rush off so quickly after the interview because we've got a special treat. Some of Kuan-wen's real stand-up comedy will be played right afterward. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into humor, culture, and identity together. Today, I'm very pleased to have Kuan-wen. Kuan-wen, he is a stand-up comedian. He's from Taiwan, and I'm very pleased to have him today. Hello, Kuan-wen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I have to say, though, I'm extremely thrilled to have you today, mainly because I'm Taiwanese, you're Taiwanese. I'm not a guru of stand-up comedy, but I have to say that I do watch comedy and I can kind of understand the obstacles or challenges you might face as someone who uses English as a second language, as someone who comes from a completely different cultural background. And most importantly, I remember from your website, you used to work as a tax accountant. So can you please give us a little bit of background on why you decided to make this transition?
Well, first, you don't. What does that mean? A guru of stand-up comedy? I think what people said to be expert comedy is subjective. You like it, you like it. You don't like it, you don't like it. And if someone tried to pretend someone's opinion they may be more valid than others, then I would say that's probably questionable. There are different types of comedy in the comedy circuit. But onto myself. Okay, I'm gonna do another caveat. I feel in theory, though, with two Taiwanese should be speaking to each other in Mandarin or Taiwanese.
Yes, you're right.
Awkward for listening, hearing people with similar accent and trying to do English together. But we're in London, so let's do it. When you say transition, I don't think is the arbitrary choice. It's not an either-or situation. I would say that's quite prevalent in our generation. You venture out into doing something and you don't completely replace it with what you do. You add it on as a parallel, or if you think of your career not as like one straight line, but is a portfolio of choices. And I just simply put stand-up comedy in the mix, and I wouldn't say no forever from now on to the finance or accounting or tax accountancy work. I may have to go back at some point to make a bit more money, but I've stepped into the world of stand-up comedy. I think that's a way to say it. So it's not like I completely left it behind, because intermittently I was doing contract work, I was doing small pieces of work. You don't earn that much from doing comedy these days unless you're on TV. So just doing comedy club, the money is quite limited. Yeah.
A very straightforward question. Why comedy?
Good question. I would say why not? Comedy.
Exactly, yeah, why not? There may be some key moment in your life that made you decide that, okay, I'm going to venture into this creativity realm. And I know that it could be very different. The road to success might be very bumpy, but I'm just going to give it a try.
Yeah. So, stand-up comedy is very popular around the world now, and it's really kicking off in the last few years in Taiwan. I'm slightly older than this generation who is at the right place at the right time to embrace the introduction of stand-up comedy in Taiwan. I am, how to say it? I guess when I was a kid, there wasn't really a concept of Western stand-up comedy back home.
Yes, I agree. I
Yeah,
don't think I ever saw any.
yeah, and only time I noticed what the modern format of stand-up comedy was when I was watching Seinfeld, the sitcom. I would think it was the late 90s, early 2000s. I was watching Seinfeld. It may have been a rerun, or I can't remember. And in that sitcom, Jerry Seinfeld would do a bit of stand up at the start and at the end of it. I don't know if you ever watch it. So
I don't know. Probably not.
so his character is pretty much similar to who he is in real life. And so his character is also a stand-up comedian. And at the start and at the end of each episode, he would do a bit or a small chunk of a set. And sometimes the set may be connected to the whole episode, the story in the episode. And at that time, I did wonder, was that? Because in our world, in the traditional, so to say, okay, it's Chinese, Taiwanese, very hard to use the term. Chinese in a cultural sense, we have crosstalk, 相声. So we have that in our traditional, as a traditional art form. And when I went to high school, I know some of my friends who like to perform. They joined the crosstalk club, student society. They joined the crosstalk talk, but then crosstalk just feel very cumbersome and very old-fashioned because you have to pronounce Mandarin in a very specific way. So I was never fully attracted to crosstalk. I like the idea of it. And watching Seinfeld and watching him doing just like random topic and just talk and be funny, I was fascinated by that. I guess in a way, I always have a bit of class clown tendency when I was at school. And I do know I enjoy making people laugh, but that is not that important a quality for an Asian student. And I was academically, I achieved quite well. So I was a high achiever academically. So that ability to make people laugh doesn't really matter for my family, or as a result, I thought that's not really important. I remember there were some classes where academically it was not quite considered as important as mathematics or English. So the tutor would just let us do some improv sketch thing in the middle, just cover some very boring theme. And I remember when I was very, very young, I enjoyed doing all that. And when I came to the UK, I became an accountant by accident. I simply need to find a job that would sponsor my work permit, and my right to stay in this country. That's why one of the professions that openly welcomed non-EU citizen was accountancy, and that's how I became accountant. I didn't even study accountancy in university. So I was doing a job I didn't wholeheartedly like. And I started to do a lot of, and then I say to myself, I made a sacrifice or a compromise for my careers. I need to enjoy the time I have after work, living in one of the biggest city in London. So at that time, I was a very religious reader of Time Out magazine when they had a print version. And I would just flick through Time Out magazine looking for things to do. And comedy always has a big chunk, a section in a Time Out magazine. And that's how I reconnected to my memory as a child watching Seinfeld. Oh my God, this is stand-up comedy show. So I became an avid comedy fan. I would just go to different comedy shows to watch it when I started working in London.
I just want to say some of your confessions really touch my heart. I'm Taiwanese. I grew up in that island. I can completely relate to what you said about the sentiment or the feelings of academic performers seems to be outweigh the other. And it's very touching to know that despite the fact that that's the environment or the surrounding you were exposed to, but you did not forget the pleasure those comedies or what other what should I call extracurricular activities gave you, and that is very important. So can I ask you something, is that as Taiwanese, I understand that in many of your comedies or your gigs, you decided to use your unique trait as Taiwanese and put a lot of political elements into them. And I have to say, though, some of the scripts are very, very good. I really like quite a lot of them. What is the advantage or disadvantages that you think this political turmoil has brought you?
Right. So I'm gonna follow up with what you just said. You have to remember I'm talking in hindsight, so I wasn't always. I was clueless for a lot of time. I didn't just make up my mind and decide to do this. There were times when I thought there were other potential solutions to my how to call it the ennui. I just felt really bored. I tried different things, and comedy was one of the attempt, and it worked out. I was aimless trying a lot of different things at that time. And when I started doing comedy, this when you read about the political jokes, these all have to do with that specific show. So my debut hour, I wrote a show and I brought to the Edinburgh Film Society. When I started doing comedy, my first thought is, how do I be funny? That's the most important thing. So I didn't
Yes.
like politics was important, but it wasn't the first thing that came to my mind. The first thing that came to my mind is, how do I survive on stage, and how do I be funny in the eyes of the audience? And when you think about those questions, then you start to think about the details, and you start to wonder, well, I come from a different country, so how do I explain to them what I find funny? They should also find it funny. And that's when my identity as an East Asian person or as a Taiwanese kick in. And I realized very early on that being Taiwanese doesn't mean a lot in Europe, because people
No.
generally just don't know much. Like, they know one or two stereotype. A lot of the toys were made in Taiwan, but it's not even their toys. And Taiwan made toys for their parents' generation, maybe, but not for the Gen Z or the millennial. So if I want to bang on about being Taiwanese, I will run out of jokes very quickly. Then if I want to just assimilate and pretend, like for the sake of convenience, I want to pretend I'm Chinese or I'm just another Asian person, it's still very, very limited. I have my own podcast. It's called Comedy with an Accent, and it's a lot of people who are not from here. Basically, you need to explain yourself. So the concept is, when people come to comedy show, they normally expect the comedian to be the default position to be a straight white male comedian. So if you are not straight, if you're not white, if you're not male, you kind of have to explain yourself so that they know what's the starting point and how they should look at you. So you have to work with the society's imposed perception of you, or stereotype or racist conception of you, and you either go with it and make jokes about it, or you fine tune it and you turn it around to take them to the starting point you want. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
I want
So I
to.
don't do comedy starting at
Yeah.
at very early on. Say I have a conviction, I'm gonna change the world, how people should see Asian or Taiwanese people. Is I wanted to be funny on stage, and then I realized that the same thing I do, I don't necessarily achieve the same effect as some other comedians, and I start to wonder why. And I ask around, I read books, and I realize, because psychologically they will never see me as the same guy as another guy who don't have my accent, who don't have my skin tone, who don't have my same size, and I have to work with all of that. And it's after years of doing it, I got a certain stage persona, so I nailed it. But then when I wanted to do my show, then I wanted to think, okay, I'm going to do a whole show. It's me talking for an hour. What do I want people to know about me? And that's when I decide that I fed up with people not knowing a lot about Taiwan, so that I decided to talk about Taiwan. But it was slightly riskier choice, because for a lot of European people, they don't really care. It would have been easier if I just portray myself as a semi-Chinese person or an Asian person or just a fun gay guy. I don't know. But to talk about being Taiwanese, actually, it make it harder for me to write a show in a way.
I was about to ask you that exactly as you said, that using Taiwan as an element in your script can be a risky choice. Do you always ensure that there is no people from China sitting down there as your audience, or at least people from China who haven't yet used to the Western ideas, or do you worry about whether your script would be offensive to them, basically?
Well, I'm not saying I worry. I would, is part of my consideration. And I do have the protection because inside the comedy venue, the context different. You can say things ironically or jokingly. You can say something that's meant as a part of the satire. So I have the extra leeway as opposed to, for example, if I write an opinion piece and I submit it to a national newspaper, the context is different. But whether there are Chinese people in the room, it does matter, and it change how the other audience perceive what the room is like. Is it like a room where we are talking behind Chinese people's backs, so to speak, or is it in a room where we have to we are aware there are Chinese people listening to this Taiwanese comedian talking, and we're witnessing the third party the whole process. Does that make sense to you?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So when I was doing my review, and I have a show director, he didn't really like a bit that I do is I interview every single East Asian looking person in the room until I finish it.
That's very brave of you.
Yeah, but I need to be sure, and then I have couple script or some sort of prepared answer when there's a Chinese person, because I need to understand what kind of Chinese person they are, because Chinese in English is a very broad term, it's an umbrella term.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt. Is that the one that you prepare 2 scripts? I think I probably saw that one.
I mean, by script, I mean I have scripted answers and solutions to immediately get back to someone if they say something. But if the person has something specific about them, then I can make observation and make a joke specific about that person or that room, if that makes sense to you.
Yes.
So, because comedy, you want people to perceive everything what's happening in the moment, but as a comedian, you still want to prepare as much as you can. So when you approach the audience, sometimes you would just have the backup default answer for different scenarios. Then whatever they say, when you ask them a yes/no question, you wouldn't look foolish without anything to come back to them. So I have my scripted answer when I approach someone. Are you from China? Or are you from which country? But sometimes, for example, there'll be people from really random country I didn't expect. I think in my show, there was someone, an East Asian person dating someone from Trinidad and Tobago. So for example, that I need to think of something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and
that's not easy, yeah.
And my director felt when I was doing that bit, I'm just dragging on. And I said, you don't understand, because at least between East Asian, the dynamic is massively different when there's a Chinese person there. And whether that Chinese person is Chinese person born overseas or they actually come from China is a big difference. Are they the first generation immigrant or second, third generation immigrant? I need to know so I know how the show can go on.
And I want to delve into Taiwan a little bit further. So I fully understand what you said about you're so fed up with people not knowing what Taiwan is, and they usually get mixed up with Thailand. That's usually the case. The question is that have you noticed any audience of yours who actually have learned Taiwan, or who have become a lot more interested in Taiwan ever since they watch your show?
Oh, absolutely. I think
Really?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. So we have the perception British people just don't speak a non-foreign language. You'll be surprised at how many American and British audience members who left the room and spoke to me in Mandarin.
Wow.
So
do they usually say, I love the food there, or Taipei 101?
They may just be leaving the room and say that the show 很好看，真的很好看,
Wow.
and they just left, and they may get in the room by saying that, oh, 谢谢你, or 很高兴见到你. They just probably throw 1 or 2 sentences. Some of them obviously speak Mandarin a lot more fluent than others, but it's a big festival. That means that I don't need to cater to every single person at the festival. That means that my risk is the niche that pick is way too niche, but maybe sometimes the niche is broad enough to attract enough audience across 25 days. And I think that was the case with me. And I also felt people may come, they want to know 1 or 2 elements of my show, but some jokes Asian will always enjoy better than non-Asian people. And I want to make people feel that they are not alienated. So there are different segments of my show I turn the direction to mocking British people or other cultures. So there's a bit for everyone. That's my idea of running a show. But I definitely, I was concerned that no one would come or not enough people would come. I had good enough numbers. Like my lowest number were 20 and my highest were over 60 people. And I never had to worry about canceling the show. Yeah.
Very, very impressive. Seriously, it's really
No,
not
not
easy
not really
coming.
though. I would say it's a mixed picture because for the general public, enough people found out about the show. But when it comes to the critics or people who have sway and who have not cultural capital working at a national newspaper, very few of them show interest in what I bring to the table. I mean,
Well,
yes, I got a selection in a newspaper for 10 best joke, and I did like a fresh from the French for BBC Radio 4. I was really lucky in that, but I don't have a very large number. I don't have a lot of reviewers coming in. So I had 6 reviewers, but some show get 10, 12, or even 15. A lot of those are younger reviewers. And I think that for their worldview, Taiwan don't really matter. So when I talk about this show, it's me talking about the political situation in Taiwan and how Taiwanese people see our identities changes. For them, it's just like, meh, it doesn't really matter. And they were going to shows that talk exclusively about gender identity or racial structure
yes.
in the UK. So I didn't excite a lot of reviewers, but there are enough people in the general public who found my show, and there's been a word of mouth thing as well.
But that's the whole thing being so great about you as a Taiwanese comedian, because you knew that Taiwan probably isn't much of interest to the wider audience, wider public, but you still want to do it. You know, me as Taiwanese, that you trying so hard, using your own influence and skill to bring Taiwan to the table, to bring attention to this small island is very meaningful. It's amazing. Even
I
just one
try.
person, even just one person in the world in the end, say a 3-year-old who came to you and saying that I learned what Taiwan is, that matters. That's amazing.
Yeah, so I felt, yeah, thank you for saying that because after Edinburgh, there's a lot of letdown and frustration. I mean, I didn't have a bad run. I think I had a decent run, but I was hoping a bit more recognition. But I know that in a sea of thousands of shows, sometimes you don't get whole control of your journey. So I said to myself, what are the tangible or possible outcome I can get? I'll be happy with doing an Edinburgh Fringe run. And I know it will be a massive investment of my time and energy and money. So then I thought, you know what? Some of those reviewers or award nomination, you can't control it, right? But what I can control is the quality of my show and the reach of my show. So if I can make someone who come to my show and when they leave and I manage to smuggle in a bit more information about my country that they didn't know before they came in, I feel like that's a success, and for me is a measurable goal. And on this front, I was happy that I achieved it because they didn't know much about Taiwan, but after they watched my show, they kind of know some country that colonized Taiwan at some point. I mean, not the specific, but just the fact that, oh, Taiwan being colonized, even though only a small portion by certain European countries. Oh, Taiwan was colonized by European country before the Chinese immigrants. All those stuff. How would you expect people to know about it? So that's one of the reason I wrote a show. And even though their bits may not seem quite as coherent, so for
Yeah.
example, what the typical Edinburgh Fringe show they are still very much in the personal inner trauma stage. So it would have been easier if I just focused my show on one idea. For example, the military service I did, and I talk a lot about my own trauma. That would be
Yeah,
conceptual.
I've seen that one.
Yeah.
That one is good.
Yeah, but they wanted the extension of that into a whole show. Whereas I was bringing in all the different stuff and bringing in Taiwanese politics. And there was one reviewer that wrote, for example, I talk a lot about Taiwan's international political situation. It's a shame I had to end the show between me and my mom's resolution. And I just thought that's because you don't know about our culture. Because in our culture, we always have a very difficult relationship with our mothers. And for me, it was artistic choice because my show conceptually wasn't quite as neat. But one of my goals is to smuggle in as much information about my home country as a propaganda. So I was talking about the history of Taiwan and political situation in Taiwan. But then for Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I still have to bring some of the show angle back to myself and my family so that it becomes relatable for people who
Yeah.
watch. Yeah.
But Kuan-wen, I mean, this might be a little bit personal. I mean, I really do want to say though, it's very important now where we are at to be authentic, and that means that, for instance, I run this podcast. I also run YouTube channel, and when I started, I knew perfectly well what people like. They like funny videos. They like gaming. They like vlogs. They like relationship. They like makeup. I don't do any of them, and I asked myself whether I would like to do any of them. The answer is a clear no. So I've been doing that lot of boring things like science or like information about, say, earthquakes, tsunami. No one cares. But eventually there will be very small number of people who just as weird as me. So that's great. I mean, as long as I can, influence one or two people, that would make me happy. So I still think you're doing the right thing. It's
And
always hard
one
to
day, if
strike
you
a
ever do a
balance.
tape makeup tutorial, I'm gonna hold you to account. I'm gonna keep the recording of this bit and say, "What were you saying just a couple of years before?"
Okay, yeah, but sorry about that. I mean, I'm gonna kind of shift the dialogue into not so serious, but it's still kind of about Taiwan. But I think it would be great to conclude the Taiwan element in a way that this is kind of a question for me to you too. So it's not you're not gonna be the first one. You're not gonna be the last one who ever put the political element into the jokes. A lot of people do that. Do you think you kind of have some obligation to deal with some, say, pressing political or social issues through your humor?
I don't think it's an obligation. I think if a Taiwanese comedian choose not to talk about Taiwan at all, we should respect their choice.
Mm.
It may be slightly more difficult if they really, really talk 0% of it, because they still these days, unless you're a character comedian, people want to know who you are. And even if you're trying to construct a different personality, a different identity, you can't really lie about your nationality. So normally people probably will have one or two jokes about where they come from and decide whether they want to do it. I talk about politics because I genuinely am interested and passionate about politics.
Mm.
And I also see as a bit of the joke writing challenge. My direct humor is a dick jokes. I'm gay, so I do dick joke banters with my friend, and that's very natural to me. And I like to see very prude people. They they got slightly annoyed or offended when I tell dick jokes, but there are only so many dick jokes you can tell. After a while, people get bored of them. So I am mindful of adding different jokes to my mix. I do observational jokes. I do some other stuff, and one of the things I try to do is politics, because I think there's this apathy towards politics in general. So to make political jokes digestible or even appealing is another achievement. I treat it as a merely challenge to myself. So like, okay, people might not want to know, but how do I make them sit and listen to 2 or 3 minutes on, I don't know, the political outlook of Taiwan, and that's why I was very happy I included some topical stuff, which means that if I do the same show in 2 or 3 years time, some of those may not stay. But I feel okay, I was doing this show in 2023, and in 2022 the former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, and this year Liz Truss, the former British Prime Minister, visited Taiwan. So I included both in my show, and I was really happy with that.
And it worked well. I really like the script. I share that script with my partner, and my partner is English. He really, really likes your jokes.
Oh,
They're really funny.
yeah. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate. I just hope more people can see it that way, but it is what it is.
We talk about your jokes. So the next thing I want to ask you is something you kind of have shared, which is that you as a comedian, do you rely fully on your personal experience or observations to write your jokes? Because I know that I've heard that some comedians, every day what they do after they wake up is to write for hours.
Yes. At the moment, I don't. I used to have a routine when I do sort of office-based work, and when I'm well ahead of my target, I've done enough thing. I sometimes reserve a little bit of time when I just write on screen, and I would just do really random jokes. So employing different techniques and trying to think of words that has multiple meanings, and even trying to find a pun. What the funny ideas I have, but more recently, I felt it didn't really work well for me that way.
Really?
Yeah. So initially, when I started doing comedy, I immediately go back to whatever has happened in my life, right? The major life events. And I start to pick out what the funny elements could be, or what the potential ones would be that I can turn into, think of mining, right? So when I started comedy, I have a whole life experience I can mine. So I was trying to dig out stuff and then polish them and turn them from a real story into a joke, or like a set, because you need to have a certain frequency of gags. So you can be telling a story, but there should be jokes in it. So the story has to be molded or restructured in a way to make it sound like a comedy set. And then after a while, I feel like, oh, I've taken so much out of my past experiences. I should be talking about what happened to me at the moment. So I start to do anecdote, but also observational stuff. But sometimes things don't really happen to you. And then
Right.
so sometimes, a lot of comedians will keep a notebook, and I now use the notepad on my iPhone. If I suddenly think of something funny, I will write it down. And if I'm in the middle of a conversation with someone, I will actually say, I'm sorry, I'm going to be rude, but I have this really funny idea. I have to write it down. And it hasn't happened to me yet. If I'm having sex with someone and somehow I have a funny idea, I don't know whether I would say, stop, put it out. It hasn't happened to me. I think it has happened to some comedians before. So I have a whole catalog of ideas. And I know some people they want to have a pattern. So they would sit down at the time and they would do some basic joke writing skills, practice. So they would just start writing without the intention of making something funny, and they got into the flow, and they may start to go back to their old jokes or their old idea and see if they can turn something into gold. That's a specific method for quite a few comedians. I haven't done that for quite a while because I've been trying to write without physically writing or typing. I write on stage. So I would note it down some funny idea, or maybe things I've observed or things that happen to me, or maybe just a general thing like my worldview. And I try to go on stage to talk nonsense about it, see if I can find something funny about it. And that's what I've been trying to do for the last 2-3 years in general. And the jokes started to grow.
Was so unbelievable of what I heard, because it sounds to me that to become a successful comedian like you means that you will be able to basically write a novel because you're full of imaginations. Because some of your
Not
jokes.
really. And I wouldn't use successful on me.
Oh, come on, you're being modest.
I'll give an example. I had a joke, and the whole thing. I have two unconnected experiences. One is one day, I don't know why, but I just had the idea that if an acupuncturist,
Yes.
the favorite hobby is fencing, wouldn't that be a bit silly? So that's idea one. And then I wrote it down. And for a very long time, I don't know what to do with it because it sounds funny, but it's just one line. And I'm not a one-liner comedian. So I don't know what to do with it. And about 6 to 8 months later, I went to have an acupuncture session myself. And when I left, the acupuncturist forgot to plug out the needle she put on my head, so on my scalp. So I left the clinic unaware of having a needle in the middle of my head for a while. And until I tossed my hair, I realized there's still a needle there. So I panicked and I ran back to the clinic, and she didn't even seem apologetic. So these things happen. So when the second story happened, and I thought, oh, because this is more like my typical way of writing a set. Not from an idea, but from a story that happened to me. And I thought it's really funny that. So the joke simply is, doesn't it look silly when I walk around with a needle, right? I look like a Teletubby. So the very first joke I came up from the set is like, oh, that she forgot to remove the needle. I was walking around like a Teletubby without even being aware of it. And then more jokes start to arrive, and I start to expand this.
Yeah.
And then I managed to put that first idea into this. So I said, I never suspected the acupuncturist was a bit dodgy, but maybe I should have in hindsight, because when we were having this small talk, she didn't say her hobby is fencing. And I didn't say, if someone who do acupuncture and their hobby is fencing, like when they are awake, all they do is poking people, I think there's something mentally wrong with them. So I managed to find a home for the first joke. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it just sounds to me that it basically there's no balance between like comedians' life and personal life, because you have to constantly jottle down some thought, and then the next day or in a few hours time, some of the real time or real life experience might be very, I don't know, compatible to that story or
Yeah, or sometimes you just listen to other people's story and with their permission. Sometimes when people write, I know some comedian, they're really professional. They will write and they will look at the script and they say, I need a joke here, but they don't have the joke yet. So they've just put a bracket, like a space and brackets and noting down needing a joke here at some point. And later, when they think of the joke eventually, because it simmers in their head for so long, or when they go to some of their old stuff and they realize that, oh my God, this will work perfectly for the gap I haven't managed to resolve yet. And then some people, I used to get stuck and I said, I need to think of this. If I cannot crack a joke here, I cannot go on and my story will get stuck. And I've been training myself to bypass that because I was writing this show. But then when I really start to write this show, a different thing happened, because I was aware something was missing to go from the first bit to the third bit. I need to create a second bit.
Yes.
And I was writing something because of the show needed it.
Some comedians who make more money, they would hire people who help them write.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's your view on that?
It's difficult because I don't know.
Do you think that makes them not qualify as a comedian?
No, they're still comedians, but I mean, ideally, so something may happen that when you become too successful, you are devoid of interesting and different life experiences, because all your lives involved is talking to agents, signing contracts, going from airport to hotels. So you start to do observation of hotels, observation of airports, which is fucking boring. And then that's why, and sometimes because your brand is so big, to make a show, you can sustain so many jobs when you're on the road, but you don't have enough time to test your idea. So you hire people to write for you. What do I think about that? I want to protect myself. Maybe in the future I would need that, so I'm not gonna slack it off. But sometimes you can tell that when someone's humor is so specific, unless they really manage to find someone they write so well for them, the joke they write for themselves is very different from people write for them. In the process of hiring people to write for them, they may become a bit bland, but you can think of them as a singer who doesn't write their own songs, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Of course, there are performing techniques, but if you're decent enough, I still think an absolutely fantastic singer and an absolutely fantastic comedian, I do think the comedian needs to have their own input. So if you rely predominantly or disproportionately on people writing for you, you're not gonna your brand not be that special enough. Because
Yeah.
a lot of people can perform comedy. I mean, perform comedy needs practice and skill, but what made the few people really stand out is how special and specific the jokes are. And when people are that good at writing good and specific jokes, they, unless they're absolutely shit at performing, I think they will have a better interest in keeping the jokes themselves.
That's very well said. I was about to say that please don't ever consider becoming, say, a full-time joke writer, because we do need you to perform on the stage. You know,
No, I wouldn't want to give my baby
that's good.
away.
Because maybe
I've
you're too
only
good at writing jokes and people will hire you and, oh, that's very well paid. Why should I practice the gigs
no, I
tomorrow?
will join the writers' room to write a sitcom. I'm not willing to write jokes for other people. I'm the thing. I will be willing to do that if I'm willing to sell jokes. If I think of a joke and I think I'm not able to do it. So, for example, it may be too offensive for me to do it, but people of certain religion, of certain racial background may be able to get away with it. Then I would think about giving the joke away. Or I just think that the joke just does not absolutely suit myself at all. Then I would not try to keep it.
That's very wise of you.
Yeah, but I'm gonna talk about something like the middle ground, the gray area. So when you say about jokes being your only input, so for example, when I do this show, and one of the good things the director did was that he would say, your idea was funny, but you stopped too early. You could have milked this idea more. And he would challenge me to write 2 or 3 more funny ideas about this. And based on what I came up with later, then sometimes I would delete them, but sometimes I would keep them.
Sorry, it's very surprising for me to know that a director would intervene a comedian's joke.
Well, yeah. He would be saying that, why don't you try to? So in a way, did I come up with it myself? I absolutely did. But would I been able to come up with it all on my own? Well, not in this case, because someone said to me, why did you stop there? You should have written a bit more on this specific idea. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, but it's just very surprising for me to know that a director would really intervene. Is it because for the timing purpose, or they want to make sure the show flows well? Or?
Well, just actually comedians do that to themselves. They would talk to other comedians and would think, what do you think? And other comedians saying, I think that the funny point about your joke is element B, so you should really switch your sequence.
Yes,
yeah.
But that makes sense. That sounds more like peer review to me. But a director directly speaking to another comedian and saying that this joke, I think that you should probably elaborate on that idea a little bit more, and you should probably shorten this one, or give this one longer. That is a surprise to me.
Really? Why would that be a surprise to you?
I thought, okay, that would only make sense, say in Edinburgh Fringe Festival, because they want to make sure the show would end, say, I don't know, maybe in 2 hours time. So they want to make sure the next comedian wouldn't drag on for, say, another 1 hour and a half. I feel that's the only reason, because I do think that they need to show some respect to the work the comedian. That simply is my idea. I think I would think that, who do you think you are? You're just a director.
In a way, when you agree to work with them, that's what you sign up for, right? So for example, I would have specific input from the show director, but there will be some other comedian who came to my show, and they would then offer their view, and it's up to me to decide what to do. For example, some would say, I think the idea is funny, but if you can change the reference from that to a specific person, one of the comedy rule is to be specific.
Yes,
and so rather than talking about, for example, oh, you're just like a typical morning show host, if you change that to Phyllis Schofield before the scandal, right? But then, because when you talk about Phyllis Schofield, people may think about a different side of him. So that's it still happened to me. Like sometimes I just think of a funny idea, but then someone give me the extra push and reminder, say that, why don't you make that reference a bit more specific? Then this joke's gonna hit harder. Yeah.
Does that mean that your fellow comedians or the directors you have worked with or you will have worked with are your biggest reviewers or like the people
No,
who support
you
you?
learn to. So people will give you unsolicited feedback, and sometimes I feel like no, you just don't get me, and you basically filter through and decide what helps you, what can be helpful to you. I don't always agree, and I don't think I fully enjoy the debate. Sometimes I find the debate a bit exhausting as well, but it's healthier to have that conversation from time to time.
We talk a lot about, content, jokes. I think I want to move on to the presentation delivery. We know that timing and delivery are crucial. How do you work on perfecting your timing, and what is the advice you will have for, any aspiring comedians looking to improve in this area?
This is a tough one. I'm still trying to figure out myself. I've been criticized for speaking too fast in general. I speak really, really fast, be it Mandarin or English. Because my English carries an accent, so it makes it even harder for the audience to understand. But I also disagree with a lot of people here because I feel on the British comedy circuit, their optimal tempo is slower than my liking. The typical British comedian or what they like as a speed of speaking comedy is slow for me. And slow can be beautiful, but I'd like there to be more sort of fast-paced comedy performance in general. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, so basically you have your own preference when it
Yeah.
comes to the pace.
Yes.
And that can be hard, I understand, because that means that when some people they believe they're giving you constructive advice, it may not make sense to you.
Hmm.
And actually another aspect we're going to talk about is exactly you using your second language as a comedian, because
Yeah.
obviously it's very hard, it's not easy, and which is why I can relate to you because I also use the second language to do the video, to do the podcast, so I can completely understand the difficulty. But to you, that's a completely new level. You're using your second language to make jokes, to make people laugh. That's very daunting.
I wouldn't say it's daunting. It just takes time and practice. And I started performing in English, so I've learned to be funny on stage in a very structured way in English. I'm not able to do that fully in Mandarin yet. I can be naturally funny in Mandarin, but I don't know how to write good jokes in Mandarin. I wouldn't say so. Does that make sense to you?
Yes or no? Because people will naturally feel like if you can use your second language to make jokes, you naturally will be able to use your first language to be even funnier.
When you're funny, a language is a product of a culture.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go back to what I said about the British speak, but on this specific thing, if you want to be funny performing in a country in a specific language, you need to work with the language and observe that culture.
Yeah.
I've not lived in Taiwan for a very long time, so I can translate some universal idea that I have and I do it in English and make it funny, true in general. For example, when I talk about the needle on my head when I did my acupuncture section. But I don't know if you watched there's a movie on Netflix from Taiwan recently, Marry My Dead Body.
Yes, I watched that one.
Yeah.
I don't know
So-
if I would say I like it so much. I
But-
think they are very good elements you can use as a comedian, though.
Yeah, but the idea of a ghost marriage is funny. The idea that the parents would be so concerned about their deceased daughter or son, and they would do some little trick to force someone to marry the already dead children, that kind of practice is funny. But you can't do that in English. So I never tried to talk about it in English. And if I try to make a joke about the ghost marriage, then you really need to know what it's like. And you need to think about it. I have not invested the amount of time. So I don't have the technique to make a Taiwanese cultural phenomena funny. So that's the first thing, if that makes sense to you. Yeah.
Yes, but I think in this particular example, though, I think if you ever want to talk about ghost marriage into your like performers, I think the first thing that came into my mind is they may not necessarily believe in ghosts.
No, what I'm saying is, if I were to tell jokes in Mandarin in Taiwan, I can obviously talk about Tinder. I can obviously talk about, I don't know, cycling. I can talk about taking drugs, right? These are universal topics. So, in general, yes. But something so specific, it can tickle a group of people to their bones, is something very specific to them. For example, I was watching some Taiwanese comedians' comedy set, I think it was in Mandarin, and they talk about a haunted house being really cheap, real estate 凶宅, because there were murder happening, right? And that sort of superstition is much stronger in Taiwan than
That
in
is
the UK.
true.
And so if you can talk about that to make it your comedy premises, that's amazing. And that's why if I were to do that in Mandarin, I want to get to that level of specificity and how funny the joke sounds like. And that's what I feel I don't have. And I would give a very simple example of the grammatical structure of a sentence will affect your joke. So the temporal adverb, so something like yesterday, always, typically, not always, but a lot of those temporal adverb will be at the end of the English sentence. So if you make that into your joke, then you can keep it at the end of your sentence. You can mislead people first. So say that I haven't had a shower, and you would assume I was talking about today or yesterday. And then someone that say since 1980.
I get that, yes.
The sentence structure wouldn't work in Mandarin, because in Mandarin you have to explain. Well, you can do it if you're like American, Taiwanese American, but if you speak Mandarin properly, then you would start a sentence with since 1980. If you do that sentence in Mandarin in your head right now, I haven't had a shower since 1980. In Mandarin, it doesn't follow the exact order.
Yeah, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So your sentence structure, you can't do this, even though it's not a good gag, you can't do this in Mandarin in this way. You have to either ditch a joke or find another way to do it.
It sounds to me that you still check the materials in Chinese, especially those who are famous in Taiwan, to hone your skill.
Yeah, and also my world, the information I consume is so much in the UK.
Yes.
Very specific joke about what happens in the UK, it wouldn't make sense to Taiwanese people, because I did 30 minutes of my show in Taiwan last...
Really?
Yeah, I went back to Taipei for the Tune Swooping Festival. So I went to the 2-3 Comedy Club and I did 30 minutes of it. And I tried, like, some of those jokes, only 2 or 3 British people in the crowd laughed, and the rest of the room was silent. It was very obvious.
Were the jokes in Mandarin Chinese or in English when you were in Taiwan?
It was in English, and the room was a mixture of, I would say 60-70% Taiwanese people,
Right.
30% Westerners, but Westerners, they don't come from all the same countries. So they were Americans, Australian, and some British.
When you are on the stage and you realize that at that very moment a specific joke doesn't seem to work that well, how do you usually deal with the situation? You just quickly move on to the next point?
Well, if your joke is based on a reference to something, and that reference is it's just a name to reflect an idea, you can change the name. So, for example, sometimes our British comedian like to say they come from a very shit hometown.
Yes.
Yeah, so they talking about a really dodgy or very bad part of the city. So you can just go and ask people, okay, so which part of this city has the highest crime rate? And you just change the reference. That's an easy fix. But if sometimes you cannot find an equivalent, you might just have to ditch the joke. So the joke that didn't quite work for me was I said, my mom to my mental health is like Liz Truss to the UK economy, in that her intention was wonderful, but the result was pretty bad. It was a simple joke, but a lot of people in Taiwan don't know about Liz Truss, or if they do, they know it from the Mandarin translation. But in general, people in Taiwan don't care about British politics that much. Not even some of the Americans were clueless. So that joke would work if I do it in the UK. In Taiwan, only 2 or 3 British people reacted to that.
Yeah, I mean, this actually brings to my next question is that say, I mean, I know you may not be confident, but I'm very much confident in you that in years' time, you will become an even more successful stand-up comedian who might be tour and perform in different cities and countries. And you knew, as you said, that usually the stand-up comedy materials, they need to connect with the audience. When you travel and perform in various cities, different cultural backgrounds and elements would be in play. How would you adjust your materials to make sure that your gig in that particular city would work?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about it, and I think it's possible. I know a lot of comedians, and sometimes I feel like I'm at a disadvantage of it. You talk about the difference between men and women in a relationship. That is a always solid sell. How girlfriends are different from boyfriends, and as a gay man, I mean, I can observe it, but I don't have first-hand experience into that. So when you see how women complain about their boyfriend and the husband, and how men complain about their wives, and that seems to be a very universal topic. That's my observation.
I mean, obviously, it's not fair. And I think your minority position happens to be your advantage because you don't have the real experience. So that means that you can just use your imagination and make that into a unique element into your joke.
Yeah, maybe, but that's when I think of, if I talk about something, that there needs to be a reason behind it. I don't want to talk about something just because it's popular. It's that I
Yeah.
genuinely felt that topic affected me, or but to answer your question, like if you want to perform in different cultures, what I've been trying to do is to, through doing the show this time, at different stages, people come to me and they don't necessarily, a lot of them are Asians, and by Asians I include the subcontinental, so South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asians, and they find that difficulty between someone and their original family, like a family that's very relatable. But people also commented on how they like the sort of cross-cultural experiences. As in, I come from culture A, I'm trying to adapt to culture B, and the difficulty, the confusion in that transition, that there's some universal theme to it. And I think that's what one of my comedy, someone I really look up to is Trevor Noah, for example. And I think that's what he's really good at. Trevor Noah is a massive mega star right now. So he talk about a lot of different topics, but he always have this specific bit that shines. That's his sort of cross-cultural experiences. And he's also good at accent work as well.
Is there any comedian who is also gay who you can frequently or occasionally look up to, or just to refer to their jokes to look for some inspirations?
Oh, you mean LGBT acts?
Yes.
I always say Margaret Cho was one of my early comedy heroes. As she was out there. She was there as an Asian immigrant, I'm not quite sure whether she's lesbian or I think she's bisexual, but she talks about sort of homosexual experiences, basically sleeping with men and women, anything that she did it very, very early. In terms of gay act specific,
You're gonna be the first one and the most iconic one for the future LGBT community to follow.
That's not. There've been LGBT people. I think LGBT now we have come to a point to realize how it's not a group of monotone. That within the community there's a lot of tribes, and in different tribe people can have such different individualities, right? We've come to a point that the TV's portrayal of gay man is just not the sassy gym rat queen. Like they are all different shades and faces. I do think like some gay act would go down the more stereotypical gay man comedy trope, and that goes down well in the mainstream market. I don't know. I would say Margaret Cho. When it comes to gay man, I would think you see, for example, I really liked early year Joe Lycett. I thought his obsession with getting even with the bureaucratic receptionist, all those stuff was really, really funny. I haven't seen him live for a while. But when I thought he was funny, I don't see him just as a gay. I think he's bisexual. I don't really see he as a queer act, but I also celebrate he's being successful being a queer act. But it's more his individual style that attracted me.
You know that, Kuan-wen, the reason why I want to, dig into this LGBT thing is because I want to make sure those who consider themselves gay, bisexual, or minority have the bravery or everything they need to become a comedian. They shouldn't think themselves as a minority and let that hold them back.
Yeah, but they also need to be aware they still have some shit. I was at a gig, and after I finished my set, the MC then say that, oh, that was the gayest thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I've had this kind of banter before, but that language, I felt it was deliberate though. Like sometimes after me and the following actors say that, yes, after that low energy Taiwanese gay performer, what we need is another. So it was obviously an irony, but that MC who say that the gayest thing, by choosing the word thing, showed enough disrespect.
Very disrespectful, yeah. I'm very sorry to hear that. But I still think that probably that is the reason why we need someone like you to continue working on comedy. Because I think just by having you itself means a lot. And as the time goes by, perhaps the impression, the image, our understanding for gay comedians would change. I know it's difficult to say that, but I think it's important.
I appreciate that. I feel this time going to Edinburgh and before, I've had really good support from some of the LGBT publications, and I feel like, yes, I want to be more tribal because my tribe stood behind me and they supported me. I definitely feel that because just some other diversity from box ticking, I don't fit in the mode of how the mainstream industry would like to say. I don't know. I'm really confused. But when it comes to, I think some of the gay I find very, very intriguing and interesting. I got to know them more recently. So that's why I haven't said I'm known them since. For example, I discovered Matteo Lane, Joey Kim Booster. So Matteo Lane is Italian American, initially based in Chicago. I think he's now based in New York. And then Joachim Booster is Korean American. I can't remember whether he was adopted but he's really, really funny. But I watched him online before, and I kept missing his live gig in London. So what I concluded was I learned to slow down just enough to make people understand what I say, but I also remember that if the majority of people can cope with my accent and the few minorities still can't, and it's their problem, not mine, because we're now living in a globalized international era. And if people have no problem with my accent, it's them. They need to train themselves to work. Like, as I feel, for example, now I understand Scottish accent and Indian accents a lot better. And I feel like if they go elsewhere and people don't understand, fine. But if they come to their show in the UK, in London, then maybe they need to get used to. So people say that you need to slow down, and I did slow down. And some people still say you need to slow down even further. And now I will have enough confidence to say, no, I am completely fine. I just don't fit in your personal preferred style comedy speed. But lots of people do not agree with you. I do not need to slow down even further. I think the comedy you like is too slow. I think one of my comedy shtick is go into a semi-schizophrenic mode. So I'm about to lose my mind, and I go from very deep voice, rational, to a very hyper, almost insane mind. I'll be screaming, and some of the words I say become almost gibberish-like. But that's intended, because when I'm so angry, when my emotions are so heightened, I cannot speak properly. And this kind of mood swing and fluctuation is the kind of comedy I do. And for some people, they don't like that stuff. They like the comedy to be like a permanent radio, slow paced radio comedy. That's absolutely fine. You don't
But
like my
that's your
stuff.
style. I don't think you should ever change your style for
But
them. There
took me
will be
some
people
time,
who like you in the
exactly.
end.
But it took me some time to realize that, oh, I'm not absolutely wrong. It just I don't do the title stuff they like. But there are not enough people who like my style if I do a little bit of articulation. So you have to take all the constructive feedback with a pinch of salt.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I want to echo the accent part. Is that when I listen to your podcast, which is comedy with an accent, I really like your the name of your podcast because exactly as you pointed out, the accent you have when you speak English happens to be or it becomes your trademark. And to be honest, I feel like your identity as a Taiwanese, an immigrant, and LGBT, they may be not as common, but they will become your real weapons in your future gigs. Because that is exactly something you have, but others don't. So
Hopefully.
don't ever worry about the accent. I think as long as that your jokes are understandable, as long as the majority of people know you're speaking English, then the rest is not something for you to worry about. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you can still remember the first time you did your gig. How did you manage your pre-performer, say, jitter or your nerves?
So the very first 3 to 4 months when I started performing, I always have this like a crump. Like it's like someone twisted all my organs inside, and the
That sounds
pain.
painful.
Yeah, the pain lasts about. It will last about 20 minutes to 40 minutes after the gig. I didn't know how to cope with it, and I was too afraid of not remembering a script. So I used to write down the entire script and just to memorize it. I try to do it verbatim, and I would record it over and over again, and I gradually just loosen up. So, how do you overcome the nerve? I don't know. It's
Practice makes perfect.
yeah, it's like learning to ride a bike. You
Ah,
have to fall a little bit. I don't know. And
yeah.
I study journalism. I used to do a lot of public presentation, so I'm not afraid of speaking in front of people in general. And still, I
Yeah,
felt a little bit of nerve going on stage. Yes.
I see. So I guess that means that when you did your first gig, it wasn't so bad, apart from some pain going on internally in your body.
I think the first gig went really well. Probably when the reception was better than what it actually merits. But the second gig, I absolutely bumped because I got too confident. I didn't really prepare, and that I don't know. I just think whatever I say, whatever comes out of my mouth will be funny. So I added a few ideas, and the room just died because I was so experienced. So that was painful. I will never forget the second gig. Yeah.
Every comedian has that experience, so you shouldn't worry. You know that how daunting or scary would that be when everyone they don't laugh, and then you will remember that experience, or you make sure that that experience will never ever happen again.
Yeah, and that's why you learn to protect yourself. Sometimes when you go to somewhere and you know it's gonna be bad, you either say no or you just lower expectation. For example, you go somewhere and they don't even prepare a microphone for you, and they say like, oh, the room is really small, but it's all about illusion of the stage, right? Even though it's a really dodgy basement or a little function room in a pub, if there is a difference between the stage area and the audience seat, it creates the illusion of a stage, and that illusion will make the audience thinking them more as an audience, as opposed to someone who can just destroy or join in and heckle you. You want to create that illusion. So once I went to a friend's place for dinner, and her husband just say that, could you do your comedy bit now? Like we were all chewing stuff in the middle, and I say no. I'm just like, well, surely you're a comedian. You are good at public, like performing in public. What's the problem? I say the problem is you're not ordering me to perform for you. That's almost like a circus monkey thing. So your expectation, you don't see yourself as a spectator. You're not the one queuing to get into a show, waiting for the show to happen. You're the one doing sort of Netflix on demand. And that kind of dynamic change how you see a performer. You're more in that, oh, come and entertain me then. And it's
And that question was so rude.
so I would say to overcome the nerve, choose where you want to start your gigs wisely and choose a gig where they try to create a warm and welcoming an environment that celebrate even when people fail. Even when they fail, they will celebrate, at least they try. And all that you need is, see, I'm reluctant to say it because I think we don't need to we don't really need to encourage more people, a lot more people to do comedy. There's so many people to do comedy now. But for those genuine who want to give it a try, you just need to earn one or two laughter from strangers when you didn't pay them anything. Because laughing is the most natural thing. So your idea has to be funny to an extent, or whatever you do has to be funny for them to laugh. So you only need to learn to hear that once or twice, and you will start to think, oh, I can do it. Actually, you don't have to kill your first set just to hear other people laughing without needing to laugh. You're like, oh my god, I just did this. So
Can I ask you something about you using English to do comedy? This is like more generic question. So we talk about how it's not easy to really use a second language to tell jokes. In your daily life, do you do any just some general English learning or any kind of specific exposure you want yourself to have to ensure that you have a very proficient uses of English?
So it's been quite a long time since I moved to the UK, and I guess I haven't treated English as a subject for a while. So when I was a student or when I first moved over, I listened to radio English lessons, 空中英语教师. So I don't know how they call that in. So that's what I relied on when I was a high school student. And I listened to a lot. I had a very strict English listening teaching tutor in university. Before I left Taiwan, I deliberately took up a part-time job as an English tutor to young children because I knew I would be paired with native English speakers as my partner, so I can practice speaking English with them. So before I left Taiwan, I did a lot of those. And since I left Taiwan, English became a proper tool. As a language, as a tool in the most natural sense. I still have the habit. I have a dictionary that if I see a word I've not recognized before, and I only started it a few years into uni, and I would write it down where I found that word and where that word came from and what that word means, right? And so when I go back to the word the second time, and I would feel like, oh my god, I should have remembered what the word is, and I'm ashamed of not remembering it. So I have that dictionary, but I haven't really been using it. I don't know. I feel like just really consume a lot of content in English. I do this kind of practice in other languages I've acquired. So I would deliberately listen to German podcasts or reading a French newspaper, a bit of French news, and try to make sure I still keep the language. But I guess I use English so much, I haven't really thought about it.
Yes, I think it's very important what you said, that you did not treat English as a subject, and I think that is key. So that means that you use English as a tool for you to communicate, and in order to communicate well, you naturally want to deliver in obviously an understandable way, and then you later improve by just constantly use it.
I do think though that there's one thing I always record it myself and I listen back. So I would notice something that when I speak, I don't really try to perfect the pronunciation. And if I listen back, I feel, ooh, that sounded really, really wrong, or just the accent was a bit too strong. Can I fix it? And sometimes I would deliberately go back to change something, and that becomes even more obvious as I'm editing my own podcast recording, because it's really down to the nitty-gritty. And one thing Mandarin speaker from Taiwan do is we don't always pronounce the consonant at the end, right? because when we were kids and we were told the Chinese speaker typically will pronounce the consonant at the end a bit too much. So instead of saying look, we would say look. And
Yes.
I think modern Taiwanese people are very lazy. So when we speak Mandarin, we ignore a lot of those consonants. As a result, I noticed that when I speak English, I tend to forget the consonant at the end sometimes. Some English people do as well, but not as obvious as us. So I try to remind myself fixing it. And one thing I also tend to do is I forgot to add the S to plural.
Oh, that's fine. Come on, I thought you were going to say something like
No,
some
but
grammatical error or
you're
something.
asking me whether I still do things like this.
Yeah.
I say not all the time, but through editing my own podcast and listening back. What really irritates me is the intro I recorded for my podcast. There was a massive error. There was one S missing, but when I tried to record it again, it just never sounded the same. It's never as good as that version. So I'm just like, okay, people might forgive me because obviously this podcast is recorded by non-native English speakers and they can hear that and they will understand the S is missing for a reason. But one other problem I start to have is whether I pronounce a word in American English or in British English, because I pretty much learned the American English, and I noticed, especially today, I'm talking to you in much stronger American English. I typically don't speak English like this, because when I talk to British people, I guess I'm a people pleaser, so I kind of observe what accent they use and monitor and adjust mine a little bit. But sometimes when I try to pronounce a word, I would get stuck. I would think, should I pronounce podcast as a podcast or a podcast? It become a bit of neither nor. So I would do a word in British pronunciation, but then I do another word in American pronunciation. So for example, I think I tend to say I run fast instead I run fast, or I would say laugh instead of laugh, but I wouldn't say audience, I would say audience. It's understandable, people will get me, but for the OCD people who hate inconsistency of accents, I'm guessing my English must be irritating too.
The other thing why I ask you about whether you still improve your English is because coming from Taiwan, I believe you can understand that it's not uncommon for people to be afraid of speaking English. I believe that the English education in Taiwan isn't too bad, and people, especially young people, I think they all have very good proficiency in reading, listening, and perhaps writing. I'm not sure about, business writing, but I know that there's still people who are very much scared of speaking. Just wondering whether you have any advice for them.
No, I haven't really thought about this issue.
That's fine. I really appreciate your honesty.
No, I never. I just think that there's internet and there are so many more foreign people in Taipei. So people who want to practice speaking it, they can. Quite often, people who speak another foreign language really well, they have a hobby. So, for example, they like anime, they like video games, and to understand to communicate with people who live abroad, they have to improve their English. So, I don't know. I think don't treat English like a subject and try to get to know something you really like. It could be pop music, it could be anything else, and use English as a tool.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. Thank you so much for your perspective in English learning. I remember you said that, is that the critic or something, or a director who mentioned that how they wish you to speak longer about your relationship with your mother. Do you think that reflects that, at least in England or in general the UK, the audience likes to hear any romantic relationship between parents and children?
Initially, when I wrote the show, I didn't even want to I have so many funny stories with my mom, and I've been performing like 5-6 years in. I've not told a single joke about my mother, And some of my friends thought it doesn't make sense because you were the funniest. Like you came so alive when you're talking about this little weird thing your mom does to you, da da da. And I say I get it, but I don't want to become first the minority Asian comedian who talks nothing about her mom, his mom, and secondly, I do think that's demonizing my mom to an extent, like as if
Yeah.
she doesn't have any normal image. Because I'm only sharing side of her that's funny, but I don't talk about her as a whole person. And I feel in the Western culture, it is accepted that what you say in a comedy show stays in a comedy show. That people accept it is a caricature, slightly distorted idea of someone. They may not be exactly like this outside the show. I think that's implied and acknowledged in a Western society. But I feel in our culture, if you say anything, you make fun of your parents, you'll be taken at face value. I don't know if you feel
Hmm.
so. And I need to protect my mother's feeling. I have a lot of difficulty with her, but I love her and I care about her feeling. And I just don't think I want to talk about her in such a cheap way. She ended up being the butt of my joke. And talking about my mom in the show was a compromise because it was explained to me that if I don't explain this relationship and why I left Taiwan because of it, people will find something missing. Like I don't know.
Right.
Initially, I disagree. I wanted to just really concentrate on in the very first one of the early incarnation of the show. I want to talk about um, Taiwanese identity and the war, and then later I then said, okay, I'm gonna bring my family in, and I use different generation of Taiwanese people to talk about Taiwanese identity. But I was really reluctant to put more information of my mother in. My agent asked me to show a full picture of my mom in the show, which I refused. And the compromise was I would do a Photoshop version. So I call my mom a tiger mom, but I put a tiger's face on her face, so no one could see how she looks like. I didn't mention my mom's name. There's not a single image of my mom in my mom's show. And I don't want people to be able to find out who my mom is, for example. That's just to protect her. That's my respect for my mother. Um, I don't agree with her on choosing comedy. I dislike something she continues to do to me, but does that make me able to paint her as a really idiotic demon? No, I don't think so. And in my comedy show, I do have to describe some behavior in a very funny way, but I think in our culture, they will be considered dirty laundry. We don't
Yeah.
have enough of this humorous culture. Just like for example, you know how when Western people get married, the best man can tell embarrassing story about the
Yes.
group,
The
right?
best man speech, right?
We don't really do too much of that,
No.
but we can disrupt the first night. Yeah, we can make it for
Yes.
them. Yeah,
Yes.
and that's the culture difference. So in our culture, you under no circumstances can children talk about their parents like that, similar to a Western comedian, and that's my understanding. I can explain as much about this is comedy, Mon, you get it's comedy. I'm not really demonizing you. It's not really you. It's just an idea of you. And she will, for whatever reason, she will feel hurt. I think she will be heartbroken.
Mm.
I need to protect her feelings. So I didn't dwell. I didn't go into even more. Some of the critics say like I treated my family story with a really shallow brush or something. I say, yeah, that's because I don't want to go too deep into it. I want to protect them. I mean, I'm digging myself raw. Is that not enough? Like, what have my family done to deserve to be dragged down to the rabbit hole with me? So I just
Yeah.
need to give enough information to explain why I feel a certain way. But I'm not gonna expose my family. I'm not like a I'm not like a mom blogger who have nothing to do but to show off their babies.
So I think to close the conversation, would you ever consider bringing what you have learned and developed here in the UK as a comedian back to Taiwan? As you mentioned, that I think the stand-up comedy thing has become more and more popular in Taiwan. People do pay attention to that. Do you think you will ever bring something back to Taiwan, your homeland?
Mm, so I guess my rationale would be when I develop a new show in the future, my focus will be on how to make the show universally understood. So it would not specifically made to cater for the
Hmm.
Taiwanese market. And if the show still works or is workable, then if I go back to Taiwan, I probably will contact the Taiwanese Comedy Club to do the show. Um, but if I go back, I may also do art spots as well. And anyone who is happy to have my input and how they can make the adjustment, so say from the Taiwanese stand-up scene to I wouldn't even say international because I know the UK better. But if they want me to offer any advice, I'm very welcome for them to DM me or just message me. I'm happy to offer whatever I can. But more structurally, to, for example, spending a significant amount of my time in Taiwan, say 3 months to 6 months a year to perform, maybe not. I wouldn't completely rule it out. But as I say, it will be interesting to train myself using the most intuitive language I have
Yes.
on comedy. But you know what would make me more proud, like, is to be able to do comedy in Taiwanese. But my Taiwanese isn't that fluent. I'm okay, but I don't speak Taiwanese quite as fluently as Mandarin. So yeah.
That's gonna be a very fun. I haven't met any funny like comedian like who speaks jokes in Taiwanese.
But
I
a
never ever
lot of
seen any.
Taiwanese performer, the way they used to talk, they could be funny. They just need to make some,
Yes, 100%. But I
Yeah.
never seen any gigs 100% made in Taiwanese or what we say the Minnan dialect.
yeah.
Finally, any of your future plans and most importantly, your aspirations as a stand-up comedian and your advice to people who are thinking to become a comedian.
Right. My future plans, I don't know. I think I was trying to do another show in the future, but with a complete different direction. It can be a bit bonkers. So next time, maybe it won't feature quite as much Taiwan. I have a provisional show title. The show title is called Andrews Are the Worst because I've dated two of my ex-boyfriend are both called Andrew and they're complete assholes. So I don't know. It just sounds silly. I kind of tear a different direction. It won't be next year though. So I want to try. I'm looking at options to do this show a slightly different version to take out the UK references and see if I can do it in continental Europe. Even in Australia next year, so they have the festival in Adelaide, just to gain a big experience in different cultural setting in different countries. I'm trying to develop a script for a sitcom with different production team. I don't know whether it will happen because you need to produce a pilot episode. But I feel I'm more prepared to do more writing, but not sort of stand-up comedy writing, but in a wider sense. Because I wrote one script for the web series, the East Smoke with Nigel Ng. I am hoping one of those sitcom writing project will go ahead. And any advice on stand-up comedian? As I said, I think in this day and age, nothing is forever. You make one decision, it doesn't mean you can't go back. One thing I've noticed is that after I started stand-up comedy, I became even better at tackling interviews when I
Yeah.
went back to get a accountancy
A
or
corporate job.
corporate job. Yes, I just need to zip up when there's enough jokes. They just need to control your urge to always crack a joke. But the ability to break ice, to conduct a humorous small talk, and to be very efficient at choosing the right word
Yes.
as a non-native English speaker, stand-up comedy has helped me tremendously in doing interviews. And also, when I was doing business meeting, I know how to talk to people. So, let's say, for example, I decided not to do stand-up comedy, and I went back to becoming a full-time tax accountant. Would you say my time doing these are wasted? I wouldn't think so because I built up the network. I've acquired some transferable soft skills. So my advice, in short, is someone who wants to be comedy a go, just do it. Nothing's stopping you. You don't need to acquire a license before you're allowed to perform, right? You can easily just go to shows. And also, once you start performing shows, it's not like you've sold yourself to the other side. You can't never be back as a normal person. you can still go out enjoying comedy show. One thing people notice is after people start doing comedy, they just do comedy and they never listen or never enjoy other comedy shows. So they don't have more input from other people and their own style starts to dry out a little bit. And I'm still by heart a massive comedy fan. I still watch a lot of comedy shows and constantly draw inspiration from other people. And I think as a result, there's some direction on my style always change a little bit because I may just have seen someone doing something spectacular and I thought, oh, maybe I can incorporate in some of the things I do myself. So yeah, if you like comedy, just give it a go because a lot of things are going down the drain. It's like absolutely shit to be born in this day and age. But one thing positive is you are interested in stand-up comedy worldwide. It's getting very popular, and there's so many things you can get just on the internet, which was not possible. Like in the old day, 20, 30 years ago, to see some really good comedians, if they don't tour, you have to fly out to another country to watch them. So
Thank you, very much well said. And I'm really hope that in the future, probably just in the years ahead, you will be having a very good, like very big UK tour. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed my podcast, please make sure to hit that follow button and share your thoughts with a 5-star review. Now sit back and enjoy the shows presented by the comedy star Kuan-wen.
I'm Taiwanese, and sometimes when I ask people to guess where I come from, it's a bit of bonkers. People just throw out different answers. They would say something like Malaysia. They do have a Chinese minority, but that answer really offended me. Just because our national airline never go missing, you know. Sometimes they go for Tibet. I was like, wow, I wish I were Tibetan. How cool is that? Gwyneth Paltrow will be so jealous, isn't it? I will be the biggest Instagram influencer doing posts like this, you know? I was like, I love to be Tibetan, but I can't. I just don't think I'm that spiritual. No, cover her ear. Because I suck at least 2 cocks a day, you know? I just don't think that's the kind of vibe Dalai Lama is going for. And you can't really say that now the secret to inner peace is fellatio. It just doesn't. It doesn't add up, does it? What I'm gonna say on Instagram, mouth me like you climb Himalayas. No, it's not. 2D map of Taiwan. But originally, I would bring a globe on stage just to make you see exactly how small Taiwan is. Still bigger than Wales. And also, I'm sorry, Welsh people. It's a fact. Anyway, I just need to know how many of you are actual Chinese people, because I have 2 sets of script. Understandably. Do we have any of you here?
Yeah, Chinese.
Chinese, but born here or there? Here, okay, it doesn't count. I mean, like communist. I'm like a proper. I need some real communist. Like any non-born here. No. Okay, or westernized. I think these are 2 Taiwanese people because they were swinging with the music, right? Is that right? Or you were just Western born and go for anything Asian. So you buy a calligraphy without knowing what the fuck is going on. So where are you guys from?
Japanese.
Arigato gozaimasu. It's not racist when I do that. No, seriously, they colonized us, alright? We want payback. Oh, I'm Japanese, Nihonjin, and you are? Taiwanese. See, I say so. Are you guys fucking? No, great, because that would be so wrong, alright? 2 post-colonial. Anyway, there's one more girl here. Hi, where you from? Taiwan, great! We haven't got a single communist Chinese today! You are in for a treat! No, I'm just joking. Let's just address the elephant in the room. There are a lot of Chinese-looking people in this room, isn't it? There There was, however, a Caucasian couple now stuck in the middle of you guys, another South Asian, I'm guessing a family unit. It's like, what the fuck is going on? It is okay to mention, I know you have been thinking about it for the last 30 minutes. This is not racist. This is not a dumpling making festival. This is not a Falun Gong protest or free Tibet, whatever. This is because I advertise mostly on Taiwanese immigrant forum, didn't I? At the start of the year, a friend asked me for help. So my friend Ying Ying said to me before she left Taiwan, she wants to marry an English husband. And I'm particularly careful with this joke. There's some Taiwanese women here with English husband, but hear me on this one. I say to Ying Ying, I don't understand where this comes from, because I always dated Taiwanese boyfriend before. Why? Like, where did you develop this interest? She said, I went on traveling and I found this distant relationship between English parents and their kids so fascinating. I want an English husband, so I could just send his mom straight to the caring home. I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Because Taiwanese mother makes the worst mother-in-law, isn't it? Non-Taiwanese people, let me tell you, that's why we eat with chopsticks, not forks and knife. Because you got a knife at the table, we will use it. Yeah. This fish is undercooked. There's not enough garlic, right? Okay, okay, so that's why. Okay, Ying, I took your first argument, but second, why wouldn't you consider French, Italian? They're all fantastic lovers. I have many myself. Ying said, no. This is the critical age. French and Italian have great cuisine. I refuse to do so much kitchen work. It has to be English. You boil the potato, your husband is grateful. Okay, it kind of makes sense to me, but there's still some logical fallacy. Why not German? They're also famous for bad food. He said, I've dated German before, and they're just so anal about cleaning, yeah? They will have to put the chair off when you do vacuum cleaning. I don't want to spend my life when a husband comes back home and say, ugh, dust. So I thought, okay, so you want someone with distant relationship with the parents and have really bad food and are happy with the average hygiene status. Yes, you have to come to England for sure. So,